Welcome to the Untethering Shame podcast, where we delve deep into the difficult conversations that are often avoided. I'm your host, Kira Wackett, and today we're hitting on a really hard and often sidestepped conversation: baby loss. This is one of the most painful experiences anyone can go through, and unfortunately, we've created a world in which it's one of the most isolating as well. The words miscarriage and stillborn alone are ones we say with hushed tones. No one wants to talk about it, and yet over 25% of pregnancies will end in miscarriage or stillbirth. And it isn't just the pain, grief, and shame that comes from the loss itself, but the reaction of the world around you. The question of whether or not you want to try again, and the overwhelm if you have to consider other options to having a baby. Shame fills every crack the loss creates, forcing you to judge yourself and find ways you could have prevented the loss. It disconnects you with your body, makes you feel broken, and it turns hope and excitement to fear and dread. With me to talk about this powerful topic is Jennifer Senn, a certified coach and founder of Navigating Baby Loss, who helps parents navigate the hurdles and pain of a miscarriage and stillbirth. She's also the bereaved mother of twins who were stillborn at 32 weeks and has done much of her own healing work in her process to finding peace in her loss. We'll be exploring the impact of this experience on individuals and families, strategies for healing and moving forward, and so much more. So stay tuned for an honest and thought-provoking conversation. Jennifer, it's so good you're here. Thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I always love to be in conversation with you. I know you're as passionate as I am about these topics, so it's great.
Yeah. And we were talking about that before we recorded, that excited and how weird that can feel to be excited, but it's that shared passion to talk about hard things, to do hard things, because we know for both of us in our own trauma experience, what that's meant for us to heal and how that can help other people. And so I think, I just applaud that you're doing this on a topic that I think a lot of people, particularly if they've gone through their own pain, could easily find themselves stuck in the silence.
Well, yeah, no one wants to talk about it. It's because it is the silent elephant in every single room. Mm-hmm. When you consider the statistics of miscarriage are 1 in 4, the statistics of stillbirth are 1 in, used to be 16. I think it's 12 now after COVID. It's a lot. It's everywhere, and no one talks about it.
Well, and I'm curious for you, as you think about, we use that word excited, but as you think about just the journey you've been on personally, professionally, how has that been for you? I mean, how did you get to this place? Like, even when we first met and I just learned about your own experience, and my only indirect connection was my mom had 3 miscarriages and a stillborn before getting pregnant with me. And so I never could understand fully, nor was I meant to, what her experience was. But there was such a different experience, kind of being on the other side of then being the kid in her life after she had lost so many. And so, I mean, how did you get here to this place where you are so willing to talk about it, where you are, there's always going to be pain, but there's peace in the way you talk about your pain. I'm assuming this was not an easy road.
No, but I do think this is where the excitement to be here and be talking about it comes from, because when I had my loss, it was 23 years ago. There was no social media. There was no internet even, which is how it's so hard for us to imagine. So the isolation was a real thing. And the only outlet that I had was to try to find others who had gone through it. Mm-hmm. I desperately wanted to find other people who had gone through this experience so that I could see that they were okay, that maybe there was a chance I would be okay at the end of it all, that I would somehow see my way through. And So the excitement for it is that, hallelujah, we get to talk about this
Mhm.
on these platforms that are so easily accessible to so many that are suffering. They
Yeah.
can get it in real time,
Mhm.
right away when they need it. So yeah, my I think that was what drove me and fueled my passion, is that there were no resources.
Mhm.
I was invited to a support group. I was referred to a therapist. And what I found with a lot of them is that no one really understood exactly what I
Mhm.
was going through.
Mm.
And I knew that there is a huge gap and there's a huge need for that specific kind of help.
Yeah, I always think back to when I was in grad school, we took a class on group therapy. So the whole thing was understanding the power of group therapy. We had to lead group therapy, we had to watch group therapy. And two of the primary tenets of group therapy and why it's so powerful is universalism. So the idea that you are not alone in this thing that you're experiencing. And through that, what they call the installation of hope. And I think that's what you're describing is this: you had your whole world rocked and at such a far point, not to say that if it happens sooner it's not just as painful or painful in a different way, but you were 32 weeks pregnant and it crosses that point of like, this is real, these things are happening, stuff is counting down, and then you have this, and so you're in a hole immediately and your body is going through this tremendous trauma. And so the fact that you, obviously I think therapy is great or I wouldn't do it, but I am also the
I love it
first, yeah,
too.
but
I love
I'm
it
the first
too.
person to say
Mhm.
a lot of therapy sucks. Like, not everybody should be a therapist. Not every therapist is the right fit for you. And I think the gap for many of us, especially 23 years ago, was we didn't yet understand the power of the group. And so you're
Mhm.
going in to talk to somebody who's asking you, how do you feel? Well, I feel like shit. And what do you want to do? And it's like, I don't have an anchor point, similar to kids in high school and where suicide rates are so high and mental health distress
Mhm.
is so high because their brain doesn't have an anchor to worlds beyond high school. So in their head,
Mhm.
it kind of ends there. And you didn't have that. You were looking for people that were further in the process to give you, again, that installation of hope.
Yeah.
If someone else is waking up today and they're moving through what I'm moving through, again, different experiences, whatever, maybe I can keep waking up and putting one foot forward. And as a few people are showing you their feet are a few steps ahead, you start to feel like the path is at least slightly lit up and over time probably illuminated, which now is what you're doing through the breadcrumbs of your podcast and through your connections and the work like that. And yet we're still sitting here talking about this being such a taboo topic. And so the channels have opened up. We're still seeing barriers. Why do you think that gap exists there?
That is the truth, right? Like we've got access to all this amazing information at our fingertips now, and that's so wonderful. And I'm so happy for that. But no one wants to talk about it still.
Mm-hmm.
No one wants to no one wants to upset someone, maybe by bringing up their baby's loss. So they keep quiet about it. They don't really want to hear about they don't want to hear the details, because what I think is really at the bottom of it all is people will say, "Oh my gosh, I can't imagine that."
Mm-hmm.
If you tell them about your loss, I can't imagine that. And the truth is they can.
Mm.
The truth is that they can. They
Yep.
imagine themselves with their baby in their arms that's not breathing,
Oh.
and it terrifies them.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's such an important shift because that I can't imagine is an attempt to distance
Yeah.
from the pain. And I get
Oh,
it.
oh,
And
I'm
it,
sorry for you, but
yeah,
I
right.
can't imagine that,
Right.
but they can.
And that I think there's that certain degree, I think, of maybe like validating how hard something is and owning someone's experience as their own. But I think you're right. It's that piece. And it's, as you were talking, I just wrote down, we're so grief averse
Yes.
as a culture. And we don't talk about death, period.
We don't. I know. And we don't talk about it, period. But we certainly don't talk about it when there has never been a physical sighting of the person who died.
Yeah. And, I think rippled in this, there's such a stagnating divide of how everybody views babies at that point. And we're not saying that one belief is better or not, or that anyone's beliefs are right or wrong. But I think that creates it too, where it's like, we don't know where somebody stands, how somebody feels. There's so many political components, but the reality is for the person that or the people, the family, the unit that just lost their baby, they just had a loss, and their body and their mental, emotional self just went through an unexplainable trauma that they don't know how to make sense of. And yet they're waking up the next day and have to figure out how to move forward. And like that, this thing is gone. You're pregnant, you're not pregnant. You have a baby inside of you, you don't. And sometimes I think, I don't know if this is true, but I've had a lot of clients that have experienced miscarriages and stillbirths. And working in the eating disorder field, a lot of people's bodies have had a lot of different capacities to carry a pregnancy, to, again, all these different elements. And it's a weird thing, because sometimes it's like, I didn't even have the chance to bond with them now, and they're gone. And so sometimes it isn't even just like, well, it was a certain belief or idea, but it's like, I didn't even have a moment to get to the place I was excited. And that was robbed from me too. Sure. And so it's a very weird concept, because you're grieving something that the outside world has never met or connected to. And you, in that moment, even if you have a partner or partners or people in your life, none of them had that experience that you did with that baby or babies in your body. Ooh.
I had twins. Mine were twins. And I was far enough along that I knew their personalities. Mm-hmm. I knew when this one had hiccups. This one was more active at night. This one. And I actually had someone say to me afterwards, well, at least you weren't attached to them. Oh. And so I think that is also a huge piece of this, and a piece of the shame and healing is we also live in a society that we're told by our great Aunt Mildred all these years ago that, oh, those things happen all the time. And that miscarriage is just a natural thing. It happens all the time, and you just forget about it. And so when you can't forget about it, because it is in your soul for the rest of your life, when you can't forget about it, that is what I think creates a lot of shame. Yeah. Is like, well, there must be something wrong with me, right? Like what's wrong with me that I can't seem to, I keep thinking of this, and I keep imagining what age this baby would be. And I keep thinking about these milestones for this baby that I really was just supposed to forget about, because that's what you do.
Mm-hmm. And that people don't know. I had a client who they had so they had to, what's the actual term if someone finds out that they are not, like, they're medically, the baby is not okay and will not carry to term, so they choose to
it's termination for medical reasons, TFMR.
Okay, so that's what they went through, and then they had to have this whole process done, and how painful this experience was. And they had one child already, and then they had this experience, and then they had another child that they carried to term, and she is here now too. And so they've had 3 children, but there are only 2 that are here. And one of the things that I think about with her, and I've even had this with other people that I've talked to, where they're like, that person, that baby is still a part of our family, even if scientifically this and this and this, and they couldn't have, been carried to term. Like they've named their child or their children. They've created a space and celebration. And there was one person that talked to me after an event, and she's like, I never knew what to do because people will ask me, when I'm first meeting them, like, do you have any kids? And I'll say, well, there's X number here and then X number in heaven. And she's like, and people don't know how to process that. And I will talk about, rainbow babies or having like all these different terms, and it makes people so uncomfortable. And she's like, so then eventually it's like, I feel like my only way to exist in the world is to erase a part of my reality, which is the fact that this baby, in her case, it was one, is in our life and is somebody that we do think about them on what would have been their birthday. And we think about them at different points. And we, like you said, imagine how old they would be now. And so, yeah, it's such a weird pressure. And did you ever feel that way for you? Like, again, that pressure to move on. And then it sounds like maybe you did picture those things, like they'd be 23, they'd be,
Yeah, I still do. I
Mm,
still do. Yeah. And I think I loved what you said about people asking you, how many kids do you have?
yeah.
Because you freeze. Like,
Yep.
oh boy, okay. So do I say, because you feel I think it's a version of survivor's guilt,
Yeah.
right? If you don't mention the children that you lost,
Yeah.
but if you do, well then you can instantly see it wash over the other person.
They
They're
shut
like that
down.
whole I can't imagine thing.
Hmm.
And so there you are, you're faced with like I mean, the authenticity, I
Yeah.
guess, about yourself and what feels good for you. So that's definitely a area I work with my clients all the time on. Like what
Mm.
feels right for you? How can you say it in a way that feels good? And do you care if it makes the other person uncomfortable?
Yeah. I mean, so much of that I think is, shame is the fear of rejection, the fear of not
Mm.
belonging. And so in a world that's so focused on making everybody else feel good or giving everybody else what they
Yeah.
need, it's this piece of I don't even know as the person how to integrate this loss into my life, but I'm caretaking for everybody else that doesn't know how to integrate this small conversation into their life. Like that, it's a priority shift from your own processing and healing and authenticity to making sure nobody views you as weird or they're uncomfortable or, whatever other term is. And that's such again, coming back to that piece of this is such a normalized experience
Mhm.
where we just expect people to move on, and yet it is still an experience that we won't talk about.
Yeah. Well, and my part of my story too was that I had a daughter. I had another baby within a year, just about within a few
Mhm.
days of a year after I lost my twins. So everyone around me collectively sighed a sigh of relief, right? They're like, whoo, okay, she's good now. Like,
Right.
she'll get past that. She's happy now. Everything's fine. And the people pleasing part of me did that. It just really
Interesting.
tried to stuff down the grief as I was trying to raise this brand new baby. And it was a lot. It was a
Yeah.
lot, but it was again the shame. Like, well, I can't be sad and ungrateful. I have this beautiful brand new baby who's here and healthy. And how dare I
Ooh.
be mourning over these babies that are gone because here I am. I mean, it is such a conflict.
Yeah.
And when you are a people pleaser,
Yep.
it really is a lot to try to process. And
Mm.
so I did leave a lot of it unprocessed for many years until I was forced to do it.
What was the force?
I realized I started having health problems.
Mm. Your body
Mhm.
was saying, listen up,
Yeah,
this isn't going
yeah,
to work long term. And you're not, you
yeah.
stuff down the emotions, you stuff down the thoughts. So we're going to come in through a
Well,
different route.
I had a yeah, I had to
Mm,
have a hysterectomy. I had all kinds of issues. I had stomach issues, and
oh,
I think, yeah, my body was just like,
yeah.
we're gonna work this out from the inside out.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it's the thing that I still think is so interesting because we have such a toxic relationship with our bodies in terms of, the judgment of what it looks like, how it feels, every wrinkle, stretch mark, hair, untoned muscle, your bad hair day. But it's also, you're inconvenienced if you're tired, if you have to eat. We try to condition ourselves out of listening to our body. And so you've lived in a world where that's normal and your body is just a thing you ignore or you just kind of sever connection to because it's faster, easier, safer to not. And so my guess is a lot of you, that moment you kind of had and moments where you're feeling that pull to be okay, to leave it, to close the door, you're literally stuffing it into the pockets of your body in different spots and you're just hoping that it doesn't come back out. And it did. And then it's, oh, shoot, if I don't deal with this, what's next? And it
Yeah.
is truly, the body keeps the score. The book everybody hates to read, but knows, it's way too scientific and they probably could have made it a slightly more reader friendly edition. But it's true. I mean, that's what we know is that
Yeah.
you went through such a significant trauma
Yep.
and then moved forward and you did the best you could. And I think that's another thing for people listening is a lot of people will have experienced a loss and have done the best they could to just figure out how to move forward because that's what they had to do to survive. But it sounds like for you, you realized that there wasn't a way you could thrive or heal until you turned and faced your grief, your loss, your pain with
Yes.
openness.
Yes, absolutely. It was time. I hid behind a subsequent pregnancy, right?
Mm.
So my body, and then after that, I just felt like my body was just kind of ruined.
Yeah.
My body was ruined. It was used up. It was disappointing,
Hmm.
and just kind of lived like that and deteriorated until it was like, wait a minute, there is life after
Right.
this. There is life after this.
I have two questions, but I'll start with the first one because otherwise I think I'm going to pivot us in two opposite directions. But the first one,
Mhm.
how did you come to the decision after your loss to try again? Because I think that's maybe one of those like steps forward because and then also subsequently, how do you help people that maybe have gone through it and then get to a place of peace when they decide, I don't want to try again.
Mm.
I can't or I don't want to move through this process again.
Yeah. For me, it was this can't be the way this ends. This
Mm,
can't be the way that this dream of motherhood ends. And and I either need to do it now or I will completely lose my courage.
ooh,
I knew if I waited, I would completely lose my courage. I knew it was going to be a hard road either way. And it is.
mhm,
Pregnancy after loss is a whole other
mhm,
world. But I knew that I wouldn't have the courage if I waited. So
mm,
that's how I got to that. With my clients, it's such a unique it's such a unique thought process for them because they're either like, no way am I ever doing
right.
that again, or like me, like, okay, let's just do this. I need something to
Mm,
try to heal it, even though that's really not what happens. Um, yeah, and I think it is just such a personal decision. There's a lot of factors that need to go into it.
mhm,
And I really have them envision what it looks like in 10 years. In 10
mm,
years, are you glad that you made the decision to never have any more? Are you glad that you made the decision to try it again?
mhm,
And the fact is every pregnancy is different.
right.
Every baby's different. there's no guarantee that it's not going to happen again. And there definitely isn't one that it will. So is it worth the risk?
Well, and I think even that projection forward, using that as a timestamp in the recovery process too, because if
Yeah.
when you first go through trauma and loss, your future is kind of a broken road. You can't
Yeah.
imagine that. And that's something I think you saw too with your loss is how do I imagine a world that isn't this pain right here, right now, that feels so overwhelming? And so that question gives you a sense of understanding where they're at in their healing and
Mhm.
starts to become sort of the timestamp of where someone is. And that healing process might lead them to, I don't want to try again, or this isn't right for me, or I've come to a place of peace of not having children at all, or maybe not having children through this means and wanting to try something different. And then for some of them, it is that piece, like you said, of similar to you, of this isn't, I want to try this again. I want to go through this again. This is something I've wanted enough. And it's hard because if it's like, I have a goal that I want to be the world's greatest pastry chef, you're going to fail a lot to get there.
Yeah.
And it's so okay and it's so normal. And then when it comes to, I want to and I'm not saying becoming a parent is the same as being a pastry chef, but the idea of like, I want to have a baby, I want to do this. I think it's what you just said there of like, we don't know what happens the next time, but there's such a finality to that experience for people of that's it. I am a failure because it's very internal. I am a failure. My body is broken. I can't do this. So I can't afford to try again because the only outcome I can see is being right back here with less resources than I have now and more trauma to process. And so it isn't the same. Gosh, we just don't know, but we're going to keep trying. And
Yeah.
again, they're not the same thing. It's an outside versus an inside experience. But I think it's so interesting how quick our bodies just become a place of failure and disgust
Yeah.
and detachment because we couldn't possibly see our bodies helping kind of move us to where we wanted to go. And we don't see this as something. I mean, again, I think so many people try to do it too early of like, well, the baby wouldn't have been healthy and this is a good thing. And could you imagine this? And they're like, well, no, I can't imagine anything other than the pain I'm in because I lost the thing I've been dreaming about my whole life,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
there's that. But how does that sit with you as I'm saying that? Because I'm seeing it in my head and I'm watching your face go. So yeah.
What I keep thinking of too is, yes, there definitely is that fear. There definitely is that like fresh remembrance of the trauma
Yeah.
as you're thinking about having another child. Yet when someone gets pregnant for the first time, you may have concerns. You may worry. There may
Right.
be a little bit of that, but you're not Googling what
Mhm.
happens if I have a miscarriage. You're
Mhm.
not Googling. Like, these are not the things that you are researching or learning about until it actually happens.
Right.
So at one point, you did have that optimism. You did have
Mhm.
that safety of thinking like, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby. You made this
Mhm.
announcement. Everything's on track until it
Mhm.
isn't. And yeah, I think just not that you can ever go back to that point, but just realizing like you can, every single baby's different. Every single
Yeah.
pregnancy is different. Your body is capable of
Mhm.
this. And also I'm a big advocate for having a great relationship with your doctor.
Mhm.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
and I
that's
think,
super important for a recurring pregnancy.
yeah, especially like trauma informed, where they're
It's a
willing
lifeline.
to,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
have those conversations with you. I think when I got pregnant, I had my mom's experiences in my head. And so I had, she was told she could never have kids. And granted, she had different trauma and she struggled with mental health components and some substance use. And there were a lot of things that played into, I think, her experience that were not necessarily genetic, but were specific to her circumstances. But in my head, this could be genetic. There are these things, and again, it's because it's so normal. And yet we still don't talk about it. So I'm like, what if something in me is broken because something in her was broken? Because, it goes all the way up the chain that people have experienced this thing. And so I didn't want to tell anybody we were pregnant because in my head, it was statistically likely that I was going to have one.
That's
And
interesting. Yeah.
so I didn't get excited in the same way. I didn't want to share. I didn't want to tell people. I was already prepared for, if this experience happens, how do I want to process it? So I had every thought was, what does this mean? What does this mean? Is this thing happening? Is this the case? And again, I think a bit of a trauma almost response, like an absorption of what someone else experienced, and this caused some conflict with my mother-in-law because we had told her and my father-in-law that we were pregnant, and we had just moved out to Oregon and they were all still back in Wisconsin. And so we knew we were pregnant. They were coming out to visit the next month, but we were only going to be about like 6 or 7 weeks pregnant. I didn't want to tell anybody until we had anatomy scans, reached a certain point. But we told them because I said to my husband, we're not going to get to tell anybody in person.
Yeah.
I want you to be able to have this. And so we agreed we'd just tell the parents. Well, he has one sister. Like, she's the only other person we didn't want to tell her because I didn't want to have to tell more people in my head when this happened.
Yes.
And so I sort of lived I had never, and again, I want to be very clear, I never actually experienced a miscarriage or a stillbirth. So I don't have that actual traumatic experience in my body. But I think I had some of those fears in the same way, where I lived every day assuming this thing was going to happen. And the hard part was it robbed me of the opportunity to have hope and joy.
Yes.
And she eventually, my mother-in-law was fine. She was very like, can't we just tell Jess? Can we let her know? And I'm like, no. And this, like, you're going to have to be okay with that because I'm not telling anybody else. But I think about how my fear of what could happen, because it was so normal. And again, most of the people I saw pregnant at that point were my clients that some had really, they carried their babies to term and they had, what would you say? What's the word that you say? Because it's not successful pregnancy, because that's like the negative way people say it. What does that mean when like when the baby is born and the baby like is healthy? How do you phrase that?
I mean, live birth, is
Is that what it would be?
Yeah, live birth. Yeah.
Okay, so you have a live birth. Well, in my head, I'm like, the thing I thought in my head was a successful pregnancy, and that feels negative.
Yeah. It's like, I think, live birth.
Live birth. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hadn't experienced that as much. And so I think it was such a different piece. And so I'm just thinking about that little pocket of that and what that would be like for somebody then to riddle on top of that, the fear and the panic and how overwhelming that is. And again, the joy you lose in that, the hope that you lose in that. And it's just, it's so much, but I think there's so many pieces for us. What you said before is our bodies are designed, and sure, some people's bodies are not able to carry a pregnancy or to have a baby to term.
Yeah.
That's not the norm. And so also not assuming that one loss or multiple losses means it's the forever norm of your body.
Yeah.
But when we're not grieving, we're not healing, we're not processing, it's how do you even open the door? And when you're already coming in with probably a really screwed up relationship with your body because you've been told your whole life that your body's an inconvenience, right? How do you learn to trust it again? How do you learn to give it any sort of space to function without micromanaging it? That would feel hard for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you have this experience, you leave the hospital with no baby and a body that still looks pregnant.
Yep.
And then you get milk a few days later for a baby you don't have. There are all these things that really are hard to reconcile with when it comes to your body again and trusting yourself. And that's really what I work on a lot with my clients, is trusting themselves again, because they have that experience and then whether or not they're planning on having another child, like just
trust
trusting
your body.
yourself enough to know like you can move. I don't even like move forward, but you can move through this. You can survive this. You can be okay again. You can be better than okay.
Yeah. Well, it's
But
that idea that I think it's any sort of trauma where in the beginning it's just the only thing you see because it's kind of like in your periphery, just hitting you in the side of your face, no matter what you try to do. And over time, it's learning that experience is a part of you, but you can integrate it into your life and you can see past and beyond this loss, and really
yes.
recognizing that that doesn't mean that we are taking away from what that was for you, good, bad, and neutral. It
Yeah.
means that you're not going to stay defined or tethered to this one experience. And that's really
Yes.
tricky and hard. And I think the art for both of us from a coaching and therapy perspective is the balance between validating and holding space for the loss and the pain and making sure that people still feel authentic in that part of their story. But
Yeah.
I think not under identifying with it, which is like you said, that sort of shoving it away, pushing it away. This didn't happen. I'm moving forward. I'm good. Or it happened, but like everything's fine. And now I've got, this, or over identifying with it where it becomes the sole source of who they are. And laden in that is the shame of you couldn't do this thing and this thing didn't happen for you. What's wrong
Yeah.
with you? And I think
Yes.
both sides of that are what keep us stuck. And so it's ultimately learning to integrate this experience in the timeline and the ways that works for you. So then, like you said, you can trust yourself enough to make another decision. Do you want to try to be pregnant again? Do you still want to continue in the path to having kids? Do you want to explore other options? The choices in the past haven't changed. There's a time point and a subset of the timeline that looks different than we expected. But these choices are still every right for you to consider now versus prior to experiencing the loss.
Yeah, 100%. And I think another another layer to what you said too is to find that balance of honoring the baby we lost, being enjoying the children that we do get to raise, if that is what we want or we already have. And for your sake, not traumatizing our children
Right.
with our losses, so that they so that they can grow up and have a healthy understanding of, yes, this is a possibility, but it's not my fate because this is what happened. Because when you were talking earlier too, I totally forgot about this, but my mom had a loss before me, her first child. And when I got pregnant for my first, so I had two sons before my twins were stillborn, but I had two little boys. And my mother sent me to my first doctor's appointment with my oldest child with all of her paperwork, because she wanted them to know that this is what happened to her and whatever they needed to do to make sure it didn't happen to me. So it's so funny because I completely never thought about that until just this minute. But that was her trauma playing out with me.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the attempts in her mind to try to write a different story for you, to
Yes.
protect you from the pain, but in a lot of ways, unintentionally kind of robbing you of the opportunity to have this peaceful, exciting, overwhelming in its own right experience. Oh,
Right.
that's so interesting. And I think, and I'll put a link to this in the show notes because we had such a beautiful conversation on your podcast, 6 months, a year ago. I can't remember now, but one of the things I know we talked about in there is you as a mom with having a kid after your twins. And then me as a kid who had a mom that had experienced these losses and a single mom at that. And the ways that sometimes we can then put too much on the kids or have expectations or ideas or thoughts or kind of live through what we had hoped in other ways. And so recognizing that's all normal. We all do it. We all
Yeah.
process through and experience those things, but how all of this is just the idea that you deserve to feel your loss fully and figure out what healing and integration means for you. And there is a point you can get to where you don't forget about it, sidestep it, lose it, but you can honor it in a way that doesn't feel like it is either distractive or detractive from your life or the leading focus.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me, when I think about my mom, I was her everything because she wasn't supposed to have me and she had experienced so much loss before me. How could she not think that way? I would never expect different. But some of the intensity of that, I think, came from her never getting an opportunity to talk through and process. She still doesn't talk about it in any emotional way. It's so, this happened. It's like if she said, I've got a pimple on my face, like she would, it's just, there's a detachment. And I think that comes from years of, like you said, the beach ball. And the beach balls come back up, the health stuff comes up, but it's easy to talk yourself out of being connected to that because you've lived, I'm going to be 36. So she's spent at least 40 years stuffing that. And so, that's there. And it still shows up in the way she'll try to kind of overindulge in the parenting because there's a part of me that became all of her.
Yes. Yes, it's there. And I think that's what's so important for people to know is if you know someone that this has happened to years ago, they may have painted on a really nice picture. Yeah. Because this is what we do, right? And especially with our current world and social media and everything is we are super good at showing all of the awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what's real is that it is there and it's still bubbling. And there are times when that grief sneaks into them and it shows up in different ways. And that's, by not talking about it, by keeping it to yourself and being in isolation with it, you're, potentially setting yourself up for some really rough things down the road. Mm-hmm. I know even myself, and I, I feel very confident that I have worked through a lot of it, but my son got engaged and I had a couple days where I cried incessantly. And my husband's like, what is wrong with you? Like, you're happy about this, right? Like that's good. And yes, of course it's good, but it feels like a loss.
Yeah.
To me, that was my association of a loss. And here we are again, and I'm losing another child. I mean, realistically, and I can bring myself back out of it now because I have the tools.
Right.
But without the tools, like these things come up. And with no tools and no support and no real life work being done about it, it can really put you in a bad place.
And I think what you just said is key of the sense of any of our pain, any of our trauma, any of our loss, it will find ways to show up again, particularly grief. And it's not just grief, in a death, but any form of grief. And so with that, sometimes I think we tell ourselves we're being silly or we're being weak or we should be fine. And again, that idea of like, this is good, right? Like, this is fine. And it's like, but there's this really cute book that my daughter loves. And it's called I'm Happy, Sad Today. And the book is all about how we don't often feel just one emotion. A lot of times, like it's, my mom picks me up from school. I'm happy to see her, but I'm sad to leave my friends. I'm hap sad. And like these little things like that. It's very cute. It teaches kids about the complexity of emotions. And I think that's such a true thing when it comes to grief is a lot of the times it shows up in moments that feel like very jarring because it's like, wait a minute. And I had it recently. My grandma died last year and I lived with her for a long time. She was like a mom to me when my mom was struggling with her own addiction. And I have these moments where these just like joy, like my daughter getting to the point where she's hitting off a T-ball. She's 3, almost 3.5. She's hitting off the tee and she is just, and she goes, well, that's a rip. And like, that was just so cute to me. And she's running to the base and I just started sobbing because I thought about the loss that I have of just not getting to experience that with my grandma, who in many cases was like a mom.
Yes.
And so I think for you, it's that same thing. It's these moments where life looks different than expected or loss hits us in a different way. And so I think for the people that, whether you're relating to our discussion around a baby loss or other loss, it's realizing you're not silly for experiencing your grief in different ways.
Yeah.
And there is no timeline when someone's going to be, well, it's been 10 years, it's been 20 years, it's been 40 years. You are entitled to experience your grief on and off for the rest of your life. The push I think we're talking about is you're also allowed to process and heal from your grief so that you don't stay stuck in it where you're in a state of torment and isolation. And that's the difference.
Yeah.
As we're sort of wrapping up, I'm thinking maybe, and if I'm putting you on the spot too much to give it one question, let me know. But I'm wondering, for those that have had a loss, what would you say is maybe that one sort of next step to take? What is that one foot forward when you think about the path that started to be illuminated for you and what you do? And then on the flip side, for those that maybe know someone that's experienced a loss, what could they say or how could they help be a part of that path?
Yeah. I think the main thing in the main path would be to talk about it. Talk about it. And don't stop talking about it until you've figured out what feels good to you, what feels right for you. What if you need to display photos, if you have them, that's fine. Some people might not love that in your family, but it's okay. And if you need to talk about it with your partner and they kind of are like, why are you still talking about it? So keep talking about it until it's okay. And so that's really, I think, finding someone to talk about it with, finding ways to talk about it until you reach the point where you know that you're finding your balance, you're making some sense of it, you're finding a little bit of peace with it, because it takes time again. And I love what you said about not having a timeline, because there is no timeline and it comes and goes. And so that I think is most important. If there is someone in your life who is experiencing this or has experienced this, I always tell people, if you know anyone, I don't care if it's been 25 years, send them a text and say, hey, I was thinking about you. And if you know the baby's name, even better. If you don't, just say your baby. I was thinking about you and your baby today and just wanted you to know that I'm sending my love. I mean, those things, because when you think about the children that you have that are living, right? And all of the things that we brag on them about, and we're so excited to share all of these things, all of the pictures, everything. And lost parents feel the same way, but we just don't get to. So I think sharing with that, having someone remember, because that is also one of their biggest fears, is that everyone will forget about my babies, and that it's my sole job to keep their memory alive. And if someone else just does it out of the blue, that means everything.
I think that's so powerful, because I think what you just said too, you gave some language to it, because a lot of the times we talk ourselves out of doing those things because we don't know what to say. And then we'll couch it in, I don't want to offend them or be rude. And I think that is, again, like you said, that in the beginning, I can't imagine. You can, and think about what we look for when we're in pain. Even if and empathy isn't going through the same thing as someone else, it's being willing to understand what that's like for them and what they need. And so even just the idea of, I was thinking about you today, or, hey, I listened to this episode, Because anybody that's at this point right now hearing this listened to an episode on baby loss. That's your link. Sending it and saying, hey, I listened to this today and it made me think of you. And I just want you to know if you ever need to talk, I'm here. And so it's that it can be as simple as that, and using these pieces and finding ways to show your support and realizing at the end of the day, people would rather you put your foot in your mouth, but say something than just hover in silence. I would rather you ask me questions about my trauma and get it wrong than to not try at all. And I think that's the connection.
And I think to go even one teeny step further is if you ever want to talk about your baby, I would love to hear about it. I would love to listen.
That's a good one, because then it is you just opening the door that they can talk about whatever they want.
Because they've heard everyone's rebuttals. So they've heard everyone's opinions of how to fix it and how to make it better. What they really want is someone to listen.
I love that reframe towards that, and opening the door to just say, I want to hear your stories. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to hear it. Yeah. Oh, this has been wonderful. So I'm going to put links to every place for people to find you. I'll link to our episode on your podcast, but just your podcast in general, because it's incredible, and your website. What if someone is thinking about, gosh, this person is my person, I need to work through something. What would you say is kind of the best place to go, or the next step for them to get connected with you? Is it on your website?
Yeah, jennifersenn.com, my website, or you can DM me on Instagram. I'm in there quite a bit too. So yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has been, I don't know how to put it into words. I think thought-provoking. I'm having a lot of processing happening just around like the ways that I'm showing up and thinking about these things, but just compassion building. And I really appreciate that you created that space to have people just hold that container of understanding and compassion. And I was doing a presentation a few weeks ago, and somebody put in our designed alliance that we created that they were looking for compassionate witnessing. And I think even what you just described with that listening piece, that just being there, it's so beautiful. Everyone, make sure you hit all of Jennifer's links. I can't say enough good things about the podcast. She's such an incredible interviewer and wants to hear stories and wants to help create that sense of connection and compassion, not just connecting with her, but other guests that might be people that you relate to as well. And so check those things out. Again, this happens to all of us directly and indirectly. And so it's okay to fumble through it. And let's all agree that we're going to start talking about it. And for now, go forward, write your own story. We'll see you next week.